Good morning, this is Randy. This is basically how I see the progression of life going in general. The big picture. So, for example, let's take a child who's born in 1980. So we're going to have different planes of time, age, and development. These planes are all moving through time. So a child born in 1980. So let's say they get through childhood, through school, and they reach adulthood in 2005. I say 2005 when they're 25 years old because the brain doesn't even really fully develop until age 25. And let's say they went to college and graduated, they at least have a bachelor's degree. And now what happens in their life is it's 2005 and they start becoming focused on survival mode because now they're independent. They've broken away from their parents and they have to focus on how they're going to survive independently. That would be the normal course of development. So let's say they are able to survive and they, are living from paycheck to paycheck, but yet they are independent and they're kind of able to stop thinking a little bit about, money, and they kind of settle into a routine of work, independence, and they work on that for a little while. And what usually happens next is they think that it's time for a relationship because they're at that point where they're not having to focus on survival anymore. So they get into a relationship or two and they go down one of two paths. They might go down the path of marriage and children, or they go down the path of relationship after relationship in succession that doesn't work out. And if they have the opportunity, unfortunately, to hook up with a narcissist in one of their relationships, that is going to push them into self-development because of the trauma. Now, if they go into another relationship that seems decent and then they begin to have children and they take that path, then what they're doing is they're juggling all these different balls in the air. They're juggling maintaining the survival mode, maintaining the relationship with their partner, and they're juggling children. That's a whole lot. And nothing really at that point has forced them to go into self-discovery and focus on that and put the time into gaining insight, because really things are kind of going pretty well. But what the problem is that things are going decent enough for them that they don't feel any need to explore their childhood traumas at that point. And what's going to happen is that the relationship and the children and the pressures are going to end up forcing them to go one way or the other again into either self-discovery at around age 35, or they're just going to kind of drop off into helpless, hopeless, I'm stuck kind of a phase where they're unhappy and they start engaging in self-destructive behaviors, different kinds of addictions, and numbing behaviors. So let's say they're that person that, on the other hand, had a lot of different relationships and hasn't been able to get into a real stable period of their life other than the survival mode because the relationships just aren't working out and they maybe haven't had children. So they're more able to delve into that self-development, and in the self-development they're going to be looking at their childhood traumas because they have the time to. They also need to because they've had these failed relationships and they don't know if it's them or other people, and they're trying to figure things out, and they're out of survival mode, so they actually have time to do so. So these kind of people, around age 35, right now in 2015, are, I would think, in the best spot that anybody could possibly be. Or the people that have these relationships, they've got their survival down pat, and they have some kids, but they have a whole lot of support, and they still try to juggle that fourth ball in the air at the same time, which is that ball of self-discovery. But they're going to be slow moving on it, and those are the people that, seem to have it all, but they're just really under a lot of pressure. But all at the same time, since we're all moving through time together, it's 2015, and the pressures of society are getting worse. They're squeezing us. As we all move through time together as a collective, society is squeezing us and pushing us and making things more difficult. There's more addictions. There is at least as much abuse and childhood traumas as there ever was to deal with, and at least as much narcissism in adulthood and in childhood to deal with as there ever was. So that's squeezing us and making recovery time and self-discovery more difficult, more grueling. And, at some point in this equation, a lot of people have just drifted off or checked out or given up. They decided they're not able to, a lot of them can't even maintain the survival mode. So how are they ever going to get to these other things in a healthy manner? The equation the scenario I presented is basically, the best you can do. That's if everything goes well. There's all sorts of things that could interfere in that along the way. But if everything goes well, by the time you're like 35, you're freed up enough to start working on yourself. And, unless that's your career and you've already been able to blend school with self-discovery, which was, thankfully, I was able to do that. So I was working on survival mode at the same time that I could work on personal development because they're in the same field. So that was really lucky for me. But society does squeeze you as you move through time, and this population is growing and things seem to be getting worse. So that uphill climb seems to take longer and be more grueling and difficult to walk that path steadily, and we get sidetracked. And then we have the artificial intelligence and the artificial foods and the artificial everything interfering with, over time, what used to be natural. So things are becoming less and less natural, and we know that things that are natural are better. instinctively we know natural things are better than unnatural things. And I can't think of any way that that is not true. So this is how I see human development on this really, really broad scale and kind of the big picture. And you also have to take into account gender. And in history, throughout history, we know men have not really explored their self-development or insight, or thought that looking at childhood traumas or relationships or going to therapy or doing any healing work other than just on their physical bodies was of benefit. So we haven't seen that like we have seen with the female gender. So I propose that the men are at a significantly lower advantage there, unless they, kind of move outside of the pack and do this stuff anyways, regardless of whether or not the collective consciousness of males in the past have decided to venture along that path. So it'd even be harder for them. Anyway, I wanted to present kind of what I thought about how people move through and why it's more difficult now. And then you can think about babies that were born then in 1990 and in 2000 and 2010, and project this, how the societal pressures will likely become worse. Things that are natural will become less and less unless we create and focus and choose to make natural things versus unnatural things and artificial things. And unless we are somehow able to stop child abuse, narcissism, and childhood traumas and slow that down, it's going to take even longer and longer, and there's going to be even more and more barriers that can jump into someone's path of development that can divert their attention away from kind of the quickest path to self-development, which I, figure right now is at minimum age 35, when it starts really knocking at their door for most people. Well, I hope you liked this video, and I'm sure that you have a lot of great ideas on this too, and I just felt like I wanted to try to put my thoughts into words today about this topic. Thanks for listening.